Hey everyone, so my name is Luis, I'm from Manila. This is my first time in Saigon, and it sounded from yesterday's attendance that for a lot of you, this is also your first time in Saigon. But I am gonna kind of make a lot of comparisons with the Vietnamese population. The Philippines and Vietnam seem to be kind of similar in a couple of different ways. Back on Tuesday when I first arrived here, I spent most of the day just kind of walking around District 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and trying to get a sense of how this city works. It's got some interesting similarities with Manila. Like the Airbnb where I'm staying is surrounded by construction. So there's all of these new buildings kind of coming up all at the same time. And back home where I live, I'm in a kind of a new business district. And when I open my window every morning, there's nothing but construction going on all around me. So, I mean, it's kind of a very similar society. It seems like both Manila and Saigon are kind of in a constant state of transition where things are constantly changing and growing. And the work that we're doing in Manila for our own countrymen, I think is the kind of thing that maybe you guys here in Vietnam can also kind of maybe take some notes from, even if we're not necessarily exactly the same. There are some things that I can talk about and kind of share our learnings with you. Then maybe there's some things that you might be able to apply yourself in your own situation. This way, here we go. So there are about 10 million Filipinos that are living overseas. So out of 100 million Filipinos in total, about 10% of our population is not in our country. Vietnam has about 2.5 million people living overseas. So, it's not exactly the same size, but there are definitely similarities. The reason why we left our country back in the 80s and 90s and continuing on to the 2000s is because there was not enough jobs for us to kind of find enough money to kind of maintain the lifestyle that we wanted for ourselves and for our families. So we have a very large migrant population. And in 2015, that migrant population sent about $30 billion in aggregate back home to the Philippines. So this was 2015 numbers. It grows by about $2 to $3 billion every year, so about 8 to 10% on average every year. That number just keeps climbing and climbing. So even if the economy back home is, kind of improving, it's still a little, we're still very much kind of dependent on migrant worker remittances. That $30 billion is about 10% of our GDP, by the way. So, if it suddenly disappeared overnight, the country would be in trouble. The most interesting part about this is that of all of these countries, if you put them all together, the Filipinos that sent that $30 billion back home, it cost them about $1 billion in fees. So somewhere between 3 and 5% on average is what they had to pay. Which is, I don't have to say that it's a lot of money, but I'll say it anyway. It was a lot of money. And part of our mission at Bloom and, part of the mission of many blockchain or Bitcoin remittance startups is kind of reduce that fee as much as possible. That's what we really want to do, right? So if it's the blockchain that will allow us to do it, we will do it. If it's some other technology that will allow us to do it, we will do that, right? But I'm going to share with you today some of the techniques that we've put together over the past 2.5 years, kind of trying to pursue that singular mission of making those remittances as cheap as possible. So the Philippines is here, that little yellow squiggle over there. And I'm going to zoom in to our experiences from sending money from Korea to the Philippines. This is kind of where we've mostly specialized and focused a lot of our efforts over the past year. So there are about 59,000 Filipinos in South Korea. It's probably a little bit more than that because some of them are hiding and not reporting that they're actually living there. And in 2015, they sent about $250 million, $230 million back home. Okay, so in the grand scheme of things, this is a very small amount, but for us, it was the perfect kind of place to experiment because in a market that's small like this, with less than 60,000 people, the tendency is that the financial services like remittances tend to be very expensive because there's not enough competition to really drive the cost down, right? So in 2015, those 60,000-ish Filipinos sent $230 million back home, and it cost them about $13.8 million in fees, which is about 6%, which is higher than the global average, okay? And with the blockchain, with the services that we've built out of Seoul, sending money from Seoul to any place in the Philippines, we were able to reduce that by about 50%. So when we kind of calculate the cost of sending money from Korea to the Philippines, we are usually able to give them that service of somewhere between 2.5% to 2.8%, which is about half of what they were paying before. So it's it's a big enough savings, and it's impactful enough that we think that this is the kind of thing that is very worth exploring further and sharing with our neighboring populations and diasporas, and hopefully we can kind of all learn and kind of improve this process even further together. So this is the basic blockchain remittance workflow. Okay, it's actually, I've simplified it here because I wanted to kind of distill it down to its core essence. And there's 3 parts. Underneath here is the on-ramp, and then the conversion, and then the off-ramp. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down. Every step of the way, I'm going to break it down, and I'll explain exactly what that means. Okay? So, so this is what the on-ramp is. The on-ramp is the act of taking your cash, your hard-earned wages in Korea, in this case, taking your hard currency, your paper money, and putting it into the system, and that's your on-ramping it, right? So in Korea, this is our partner, Payfill. They have a little shop, and the reason why we were able to get very early traction. So the Philippines is about 85% Catholic, so it's a very, very religious country. And this shop, and I wasn't able to take a picture of the landscape, but it's beside the only Catholic church in that area. So on Sundays, all the Filipinos will go to Mass, and then after the Mass, they'll remit money. So it's a nice little kind of a way to focus your marketing. So this is what the inside of the shop looks like. So you go up to one of these 2 Filipinas, and you tell them, please take my money, and then here's the list. Here's the name of my beneficiary or my relative, my loved one back home. Please deposit this money in A, their bank account, if they've got a bank account, or B, send it through the cash pickup network. And I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later. For them, all they have to do is enter the details, accept the cash, press a button, and the money is magically transmitted to the Philippines. At least from the customer perspective, it was magic because it happens in about 10 to 15 minutes, but obviously there's something going on underneath it that is what the blockchain enables. So that's this part. When the Korean won, when the hard currency is received by the shop in Korea, what they actually do is they convert it into another currency, which is, in this case, Bitcoin. So the blockchain, when we talk about the blockchain, that's a technology that describes a whole bunch of different things, right? And in the case of Bitcoin, it's a variant of the blockchain. It's the most successful and most popular one, and you'll hear a lot of us here talk about Bitcoin when we really mean the blockchain, and kind of vice versa, because in our heads, they're kind of almost the same thing in our heads, but they're really not, that you kind of need to separate them sometimes. In this case, the Korean won is converted into Bitcoin, okay? And the Korean won is no longer Korean won, it's now Bitcoin. It gets transferred to the Philippines, to Bloom, and what happens is that Bloom then kind of turns it back into Philippine peso on the Manila side, and then we use something like this. This is what the cash pickup network in the Philippines looks like. You line up. This is actually it's like a pawn shop. You line up here. The beneficiary, the relative who receives the remittance, lines up, shows their photo ID, gives like a little tracking number that indicates the details of the transaction, and then they pull out cash. So this is a 1,000 peso bill, which is about $20. The typical remittance to the Philippines is about 5 of these. So 5,000 pesos, which is roughly about 100 USD. This is the reason why the blockchain remittance method is superior to the traditional method. Okay, so I'm going to talk through the old way, and then I'm going to talk through the blockchain way. But I'm going to use the Canadian kind of corridor as my main example now instead of the Korean one, because it works out a little bit better. So if there is a small remittance business in Canada, prior to the blockchain, what they used to do was they would have to pre-fund call it $100,000 3 times a week. They would have to send $100,000 3 times a week to a partner in the Philippines. And that partner in the Philippines would hold on to that money. And then whenever a remittance customer shows up at RemitBiz in Canada, what actually happens is that they just draw down from that $100,000, right? So in order to do an instant payment, what they've done is they've prepaid for it, right? They've sent that money across the ocean already, and it's there sitting in Manila. It's waiting to be used. It's waiting to be paid out to someone. So it's expensive to do it this way because firstly, you need to have $100,000 or you need to have a large amount of capital that you can kind of pre-fund and send across the ocean, and it will just sit there and wait for transactions to happen. And because of this, it makes it very hard for small businesses to get into this game, okay? It makes it very difficult because you need to have a large amount of capital that you are willing to just kind of float in another country. With the blockchain way, the remittance business in Canada doesn't have to pre-fund anything. Instead, they will send money, any amount, $200 in this case, $100, even less than that if they wanted to. They can send it as needed in real time. And the reason why this is powerful is because you no longer have to have the very high capital requirement that is usually associated with these kinds of businesses. In other words, anyone who is licensed can legally do this, even if they don't have $100,000. They could just send small amounts as their customers are giving them payments, right? And that's the first time in the world that you'll be able to do this, and it'll still make economic sense. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Amazon Web Services, but we often say this when we're explaining it to our business customers. The blockchain is to remittances as Amazon Web Services is to web hosting. And what that means is Amazon Web Services, or AWS, the main thing that they did that was so powerful was they charge you by the hour when you use any of their web hosting services. So what that means is that if you only need, uptime of 10 hours, you only pay for the 10 hours. If you suddenly notice that your website is receiving tons of traffic, then you bump up your Amazon Web Services package or your plan or whatever, and then you increase your server capacity as needed, again, by the hour. The blockchain is a little bit like that, at least in terms of remittances. The blockchain allows us to do these tiny transactions on demand, as needed, and we only pay for that. We only pay for that small amount. We don't pay the huge $100,000 pre-funding capital requirement, right? So I've actually kind of said that here, just in case you want to just, if you ever want to quote it, it's just this. Instead of paying for remittances in bulk before they happen, businesses can now pay in real time as needed. And that's kind of the magic that the blockchain can give in the very specific remittance business scenario. So I had to keep emphasizing this because this is actually a really important part, right? So you no longer need pre-funding. In other situations, sometimes we call them lines of credit. So instead of pre-funding it, you just draw down on a line of credit and then you get billed for it later. So small businesses can now work directly with their counterparts in other countries and settle with the blockchain in real time. So the interesting part here is the working directly with our counterparts. So we're a small company in Manila. Dominic runs a blockchain company here in Vietnam. We've got another friend, Anson, who has his own company in Singapore. We're all smallish, remittance startups. We could work together, and all we would really need is the blockchain to kind of settle between us. We don't actually need very lengthy or onerous memorandums of agreement that detail every single thing that needs to happen, like in terms of like cute long lines of credit or pre-funding agreements or whatever. Instead, we can just settle as needed. If I have a customer who wants to send money to Vietnam, I'll tell Dominic that this is, this is the transaction size, it's $100, whatever. And we can settle it almost instantly. And that's all that business relationship really would require. So here it is again. These are the blockchain benefits for remittance business. So number one, zero pre-funding. You have very low capital requirements. You have less exposure. Second, there's a new revenue stream from trading, and I can talk about this later offline. If anyone's interested in this, it's a little bit too detailed to go into during this particular presentation. And then the third one is that it also allows us access to future remittance tools, some of which our company are trying to build, and actually many other companies are trying to build around the world. Some of the future tools that we might see on the blockchain are things like the transmission, the secure encrypted transmission of KYC information, so know your customer information. In all countries, they require some kind of photographic ID, and some proof of identity and stuff like that for both the sender and the recipient of a remittance. And the blockchain could facilitate that transmission. And of course, interbank settlement is kind of one of the most obvious ways that blockchain can help us. Given what we've learned, here's kind of a broad plan for how we think that we could apply these learnings for a slightly larger audience, not just for the Philippine situation, but for all of our kind of neighboring countries in the region. This is what we have right now. So 2016, we've got inbound transactions into the Philippines. It's pretty small, all things considered. The remittance market globally is about $500 billion, but our total network size right now, because we're only doing Canada, Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore into the Philippines, the total network size of that is only about $5 billion, so it's not very big, right? What we'd like to do is, by next year, maybe we can get Indonesia and Vietnam online, maybe get a couple more countries to join in, representatives from Australia and the UK perhaps, right? So now with just these few other countries we've added to the network, the total amount of volume that the network would be able to handle would be somewhere in the $15 billion range, so it's a 300% increase, all right? And then 2018, we imagined that we would be able to get partners in Mexico and India online, and if you're gonna get Mexico online, you really need to get the United States online as well. And suddenly that network can handle $120 billion worth of remittance volume annually. And that's a good 30% of all the global transactions put together. And once we get this done, what we'd like to call it is the Eastern Union, because it's kind of it's like a response to, the traditional remittance network. The largest remittance network in the world is Western Union. It's a 100-year-old company. I think it's about time that, maybe we gave it a run for its money. And I think that the way that we would eventually do that is with lots of small companies kind of being experts in their own local domains, in their own local jurisdictions, kind of all working together and being bound and woven together just by the blockchain. So this is how you could get involved if any of you are interested in what we're doing and what we're trying to put together. We're always looking for licensed remittance businesses that we can kind of help enable with our technology. So I guess the biggest difference with this approach is that Bloom itself is not a remitting business. We are a software enabler. We build platforms and we offer those platforms to licensed businesses. So it's these remittance businesses that we help upgrade, right? So if you're a licensed remittance business, you can get involved. If you're an expert in your local banking, so if you're an expert here in Vietnam, or if you're an expert in Singapore or in Hong Kong or wherever, you could help us by kind of explaining or expounding on the regulatory environment in your particular locale. If you're an NGO focusing on migrants, right? These are the people who are first touched when it comes to a migrant. When he first lands in a new country, there's usually an NGO who will kind of help him through the process, help him or her through the process of kind of acclimating to the new environment. And obviously, if you are a local blockchain expert or if you're an experienced trader, you can also get very much involved in what we're doing. So this is the work of this will be the work of thousands of people. Everyone needs to kind of pitch in because it's a really, really big problem. And remittances will continue to be the, like a primary or secondary source of income for many, many low-income families around the world for the rest of time, I think. And if we really want to do something revolutionary, we do it by working together. We don't do it by kind of, we don't do it by directly disrupting what's out there. We just kind of help empower and enable the people that are already around. So that's it. Really like it. If anyone is interested, please approach me later. Let's talk about it a little bit more. There's a lot of detail here that I could share even further. I don't know if you can read that. That's supposed to be my email address, but it's you could also follow me on Twitter. That's my Twitter name, and later I can just share my card with you. So that's it. Thanks very much for listening, guys.